Canadian Trade Office Executive Director, Mr. Jim Nickel. Thank you so much for joining us. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen. 副市长 ，Ladies and gentlemen， 各位我们嘉宾，大家好，大家午安，欢迎大家莅临我们今天的从桃园看世界的场次。今天的场次呢是加拿大场次。Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our lecture series by foreign representatives here in Taiwan. We're very honored here today. Joining us, we have from the Canadian Trade Office in Taipei, the Executive Director in person to tell us all about Taoyuan. Now, first things first, Andy has to introduce the VIP guest. 接下来呢，我们介绍贵宾和长官，请介绍到长官的时候稍微起身和大家挥手，也报告副市长，我们从这个场次开始有录影哦，所以要对那边的摄影机挥手致意一下。来，掌声欢迎的是我们桃园市副市长王明炬，王副市长莅临 ，Please welcome the Canadian Parliament City, Mr. Ladies and gentlemen, and now joining us once again, let us welcome 加拿大驻台贸易办事处我们代表倪傑民代表 Mr. James Nickel, Executive Director, Canadian Trade Office in Taipei. Welcome, sir. Thanks, sir. So honored for you to join us. 紧接着呢，也是加拿大驻台贸易办事处我们政策及媒体事务专员严文君小姐 ，Please welcome Madam Sylvia Relations, Canadian Trade Office in Taipei. 好的，接下来呢，要欢迎的是我们主办单位，我们桃园市政府，我们秘书处，掌声欢迎的是我们主任秘书叶忠富主秘，掌声欢迎 Mr. 叶，主任好 ，Secretary General of Taoyuan Secretariat, our host organizer. 接下来呢，我们欢迎的是桃园市立图书馆馆长施兆辉馆长，馆长好 Director of the most beautiful public library in all of Taiwan, Taoyuan Public Library. Ladies and gentlemen, 紧接着呢，我们以热情掌声恭请我们桃园市副市长来为我们致辞，掌声欢迎王明炬，王副市长，副市长好。
谢谢我们倪傑民代表我们施兆辉馆长，还有我们在座所有的桃园乡亲大家午安，大家好。大家好。我已经来这个场地很多次了那今天呢，我们来跟大家分享他的经验的是我们的加拿大的倪傑民倪代表。加拿大是一个很特别也很有趣的国家也是一个很大的国家，大家应该也都知道你看地图上看好大一片，这边是太平洋，那边是大西洋然后呢，加拿大里面的语言也特别也很多时区因为很大，所以时区好多个。那语言呢，这个英文、法文都会通都有，还有一个法语区，这个也蛮特别的那然后呢，加拿大呢是大英国协源自于大英国协的体系。可是呢，我的理解里面，它好像是它应该是少数几个大英国协的国家，可是开车是右驾澳洲左驾香港左驾，新加坡左驾可是加拿大是右驾。所以其实呢这个我想大家对这些历史应该也都耳熟能详加拿大呢是一部分像英国的国家一部分又像美国的国家，它又在北美，所以这个很有趣我相信大家可能在座各位那个乡亲应该有很多人也许都到加拿大去过，甚至住过很长的时间都有可能。那今天我们非常高兴欢迎我们倪傑民来代表来跟大家分享这个他的加拿大的他其实是一个职业外交官过去也在中国或是其他的国家担任过大使担任过公使。那今天很高兴邀请他来跟大家分享他的加拿大的这些可以分享给大家看到的这个历史文化经验那谢谢，我们再度欢迎他，谢谢。
谢谢副市长，最后再回顾我们这次的礼物给我们 ，Please, Mr. Executive Director, Mr. Nickel, our gift from Taoyuan City for you, the best fruit tea in Taoyuan。来，请看我们两位大会摄影师，OK， 掌声鼓励一下 ，Thank you, Mr. James Nickel, for coming here today. This is our gift from Taoyuan, the best fruit tea in Taoyuan, on behalf of the Mayor of Taoyuan and whole of Taoyuan City. Thank you so much. Please be seated. 我们副长，恭请副长请入座。我们接下来请大会摄影师来到我们中央方位。Let's have a banner photo. This is the banner. Your banner, sir. Your Excellency, thank you. Lecture Series 5 for Representatives in Taoyuan. 来，我们先看大会摄影师。好，先看举手的这位。各位，如果你方便的话，暂时拿着口罩；如果不方便的话，没关系。OK。先看这边 ，Our first cameraman, the one in front. Wow, several shots together. Wonderful smile, because we have a wonderful series, the Canadian session. And now, the lady photographer. Thank you very much. Another wonderful smile. Thank you. All done. Job well done. And now, let's begin the Canada session. Please welcome the one and only Executive Director, Canadian Trade Office in Taipei and Taiwan, Mr. James Nico. You feel like a rock star? With this introduction, you feel like a rock star.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you to the dignitaries who were with us this afternoon as well. So, my name is Jim Nico. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Trade Office in Taipei. And I've been in Taiwan for about 18 months now. I arrived in September of 2022. I arrived directly from Beijing, where I had been working at the Canadian Embassy in Beijing for 4 years, from 2018 until 2022. Prior to that, I had worked for 5 years in New Delhi in India, and 4 years in Jakarta, Indonesia. And before that, I was 5 years in Tokyo, Japan. And a long time ago, I guess more than 30 years now, if I do the math correctly, in the 1980s, I used to work as an English teacher in Hunan, Changsha, in mainland China. So all of my professional work experience has been in this region, which in Canada we've always called the Asia-Pacific region, but today we've decided to change the name to the Indo-Pacific. And so what I would like to do today is to speak to you a little bit about Canadian foreign policy, because that's the business that I'm in, is foreign policy, as a diplomat with Canada's Foreign Ministry for, 33 years now, nearing retirement, some might think. But nonetheless, I would like to speak to you about Canadian foreign policy. And in particular, I'll speak about Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. So how Canada views the region that you live in. And when I speak about the Canadian Indo-Pacific strategy, what I would like to do is to talk a little bit about how Taiwan features in Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy and how Canada wants to engage with Taiwan. Now, before I do that, before I get through that, I would like to introduce some of the elements, some of the aspects of Canada that shapes Canada's foreign policy. Usually with many countries in the world, their foreign policy is formed because of their population, their people, their history, their geography, their economics, these kind of factors that determine countries' foreign policy. So let me tell you a little bit about Canada. I think there's a clicker here I can use now. Good, I've got it. So let me tell. So first of all, we have the. This is about the people of Canada. As Deputy Mayor Wong had said, Canada does not have a particularly large population. You see, it's just not quite twice as big as Taiwan's population. But interestingly enough, it's a very diverse, very multicultural society. Essentially, all Canadians, except for the Indigenous people, are immigrants, all of us. So the waves of immigration into Canada have come for many, many years now. So as Deputy Mayor Wong had said at the outset, that the first immigration to Canada from Europe were the French. So the French came and established that Canada was first a French colony. We called it La Nouvelle France. Oh, sorry, yes, La Nouvelle France is what they called Canada at the time. So that was through the in the 1600s and the 1700s. The French started coming in the 1500s, but they only decided to stay in Canada beginning about 1608. But from that time on, all of the immigration into Canada was from France. But then in 1759, the French had lost one of their wars to the British, and the Canadian territory was turned over to the British. So from 1759 onwards, Canada becomes a British colony. And that's the end of French immigration. No more French immigration. All the immigration came from the United Kingdom. So Canada's population is mainly then populated by people from Britain. Following that, though, in the late 1800s, as Canada started to settle the western parts of the country, we needed more population, and so Canada began bringing immigrants from Eastern Europe, from Russia, from the Ukraine, from Poland, from those countries. They were brought to Canada to be farmers in the western part of the country. So a lot of the population in the west is populated by people who come from Eastern Europe. Then, after the wars in Europe, World War I, World War II, we then had immigration from all sorts of different parts of Europe, from Italy, from Spain, from the Netherlands, from Denmark, from all of these countries. People were coming to Canada post-war, as Europe had been devastated and Canada was still growing. More recently, however, since the 1970s, the majority of the immigration to Canada comes from Asia, from the Indo-Pacific region, and primarily from China, from India, and from the Philippines. That's the majority of immigration comes from those. Those are our top 3 source countries for new Canadian citizens now. And many have immigrated from Taiwan as well. We have about 150,000 Taiwanese Canadians. Good concentration in the Vancouver area, probably 50,000 Taiwanese Canadians living in the Vancouver area. So very multicultural, diverse society. So that's the people. What I was going to say about this, the point I would make about that, having such a diverse, multicultural society means that Canadians have a lot of ties with the outside world. And they haven't forgotten where they came from. So they have a lot of ties and a lot of interests. If you think of just one of the examples of what I've said is when I told you about all of the immigration that we had from Russia, Ukraine, Poland, that eastern part of Europe into Canada. So therefore, if you think about the war in Ukraine today, there's a lot of Canadians who are very interested in that topic because of their heritage, their cultural ties. So let's take a look at geography. That's people. What about geography? Well, as the Deputy Mayor had said, very big country, lots of time zones. There's 6 hours difference between the Atlantic and the Pacific, and it takes you 7.5, 8 hours to travel by plane across the country. So very big, lots of oceans. Here's the map then. So we've got the 3 oceans, the Pacific Ocean, the Arctic Ocean, the Atlantic, and Canada has 10 provinces. I don't know if this ticker works. Let's see. Can you see the spot? Oh, it's very small. But we have, from the western part of the country to the eastern part, we have 10 provinces that go across. And in the north, in the Arctic, we have 3 territories, the Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, up into the Arctic Circle. We have 3 big cities, of course, in Canada. We often refer to it as MTV, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver. And then the capital city, of course, is Ottawa. I'll see if I can point to where those are. So Ottawa, this is Montreal, this is Toronto, that would be Ottawa there. And then the other big city, of course, is out in Vancouver. Although we do have some other cities across the country. Just briefly, looking at Canada, we refer to all of this area as Eastern Canada, but we have the Atlantic provinces, we have the central Canada, this is the manufacturing area of Canada through here, all connected with the Great Lakes and very close to the United States, heavy advanced manufacturing, the automobile industry. If you go out across here, these are the prairie provinces, this is the grain belt where we produce a lot of agricultural products that we export around the world. And then, of course, the Rocky Mountains are in British Columbia. And this is all the Arctic region up north. So the point that I'll make about Canada's geography is that very large country, very small population, not a large enough internal market to support the standard of living that Canadians have become accustomed to. Canadians like to have a high standard of living, but the market is too small and too far spread apart. In Taiwan, you have a relatively small domestic market, but it's all very close together. Canada, we're spread out all over the place. So with all the natural resources we have, all the minerals, the oil, the gas, the agricultural production, the fisheries, whether it's lobster and other fish from this side, or salmon and crab from this side, all of this produce needs to be exported into the international market. So the point being is that Canada is very dependent on international trade to maintain our standard of living. One, our domestic internal market is too small. And two, we produce too much agricultural products, too much natural resources, too much manufactured goods. It all has to be sold internationally. So for Canada, a big importance is the stability of the international system for trading. Let's take a look at governance. So that's people, geography. How about politics? Well, we have 3 levels of government in Canada. We have the federal government, the provincial government, and the municipal governments, of course. Canada is as Deputy Mayor Wong had said, Canada is a parliamentary democracy. So it's not a republic. The head of state of Canada. Does anyone know who the head of state of Canada is? Can someone guess? Who is Canada's head of state? No guesses? Sir?
Trudeau.
No, it's King Charles in Great Britain, right? So that's a trick question, isn't it? So head of government, Trudeau is our prime minister, is the head of government, but the head of state is King Charles. It used to be Queen Elizabeth. Now it's King Charles. So Canada still has those. It's a parliamentary democracy with the prime minister is just the head of government, not the head of state. Now the interesting point is that I'm going to make here is that the provinces in Canada, because of Canada's constitution, have a lot of powers. So if we talk about natural resources, if we talk about health, if we talk about education, those are all provincial responsibilities, not the federal government. So the oil and gas and the minerals and the forestry belongs to the provinces, not the national government. Education is the responsibility of the provincial government. Healthcare is the responsibility of the provincial government. So there's a lot of responsibilities that are at a subnational level. Even for immigration, the provinces decide who they want to come to their province. Now, once you come into one province, you can always move to another, but nonetheless, provinces have a say in immigration. So this means that when Canada gets involved in international affairs, when we're doing an international trade agreement, when we're doing an international environment agreement, when we're doing talking about immigration, the federal government, the national government, needs to have consultations and negotiations with the provinces to make the agreement and to implement the agreement. So it's a very complicated and messy in that regard, but it has an impact on Canadian foreign policy. So Canada, unlike other countries like the United States or mainland China, which became countries or evolved through revolution and war, Canada gradually became, there was a gradual political process that did not involve any civil war or revolution or nothing exciting like that, just very steady political progress. So in 1867, the United Kingdom agreed that 4 provinces of Canada could join together to be under the British Empire to become a Dominion of Canada. But it wasn't until quite late, 1931, that Canada actually took responsibility for its own foreign policy. Up until 1931, it was still the United Kingdom, Britain, that was deciding Canadian foreign policy. And then only in 1982, which is quite recent actually, did the Constitution, Canada's Constitution, was brought from London, England to Ottawa, Canada, So we gained full sovereignty. So you could say that Canada's actually been fully sovereign only since 1982, this gradual process. But most Canadians, of course, think we became a full country back in 1867. But there was actually a gradual process moving forward. We've had a lot of historical ties with different governments in Taiwan and mainland China. Actually, the first Canadian historical contact with Taiwan was back in 1871. Does anyone know which Canadian came to Taiwan in 1871? I'll give you a hint. If you go to Danshui, and there's a small statue of a man kneeling beside a boat. Yeah, Ma Jie, so that's Mackay. Ma Jie is his name. And of course, he came in 1871 to Taiwan, and he established some schools, some churches, some hospitals, and that's why today we still have the Ma Jie Yiyuan, and we have the Danshui, Zhongshui, and we have the Zhenli, as a Zhenli Dashui. So those are all legacy items of Mackay, who came in 1870. He had very close relations with the Taiwanese indigenous people in Yunnan and places like that, and worked very closely with them. But in 1942, Canada established its first embassy with the Republic of China in Chongqing. So the Republic of China, the national government was in Chongqing at the time. And then after the Japanese surrender, we moved to Nanjing. And then in 1951, after the communist takeover in the mainland, that we closed the embassy. And we only recognized the Republic of China. But then in 1970, Canada recognized the People's Republic of China, but maintained relations with Taiwan as well. And only in 1986, we opened our office where I work, and Sylvia works in Taipei. And in 1991, Taiwan opened offices in Canada, so in Ottawa, in Toronto, Vancouver, and in Montreal, are the representative offices of Taiwan in Canada. So those are the ties. Let's watch a short video.
In 1867, the Queen Victoria gave royal assent and proclaimed the Confederation of the Dominion of Canada, uniting 3 British colonies, Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, into its own self-governing entity. Canada's chief concern with the outside world in its early years was survival. It had already been part of a long history of conflicts between the United States and the British Empire. It needed to strike a delicate balance with Britain, slowly achieving more sovereignty while maintaining ties that were sufficiently robust to stop America from getting any expansionist ideas. In 1914, Canada, as a dominion of the British Empire, had little say over its own foreign policy. When Britain declared war against Germany that August, Canada was automatically at war too. It could, however, decide just how much effort it would put into the fight. It was Canada's outsized contribution to victory in the Great War that birthed a prideful sense of nationhood and earned the young country a greater say in international affairs. Prime Minister Robert Borden demanded that Canada send its own delegates to the post-war Paris Peace Conference of 1919. Canada is a nation that is not a nation, he wrote in a letter to his wife. It is about time to alter it. The 1931 Statute of Westminster gave Canada full legislative independence. So when the Second World War broke out, Canada was no longer obliged to fight with Britain. William Lyon Mackenzie King said Parliament, Canada's Parliament, would decide when the country went to war. It waited a week before declaring war against Germany on September 10, 1939. Canada finished the Second World War with one of the largest navies in the world, emerging among the victors with its reputation and global clout at an unprecedented high. What followed is often described as the golden age of Canada on the world stage. With a population less than half of what it is today, Canada had a larger military in the 1950s than it does in 2017. It was 4th among NATO members in per capita military spending. And by 1962, it garrisoned some 14,000 soldiers in Germany to help stare down the belligerent Soviet Union. Canada was a valued and important member of of the Western Alliance. It was also a bridge within the Commonwealth between Europe and its new closest ally, the United States. Diplomatically, Canada's finest hour came in 1956, when Canadian Minister of External Affairs Lester Pearson helped end the Suez conflict in Egypt by pushing for the creation of a United Nations emergency force to police the area. For his efforts, Pearson was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize and has been called a father of peacekeeping because of it. Canada's golden age came at a time when much of the world was still shattered as a result of the Second World War. Half of Europe was effectively occupied by the Soviet Union, and millions of Chinese were starving to death because of Mao's Great Leap Forward. Canada's global influence in the 50s and 60s was substantial, but not sustainable. In 1971, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau said Canada had overextended itself and that it was time to look inward. Trudeau eventually had second thoughts and launched a globe-trotting peace mission to ease Cold War tensions shortly before retiring, although his efforts accomplished little. Canada's later foreign policy successes were more modest compared to Pearson's peacemaking, but they were on occasion significant. Prime Minister Brian Mulroney fought for an end to white rule in South Africa, and Prime Minister Jean Chrétien's government campaigned for a ban on anti-personnel mines, resulting in a treaty that was eventually endorsed by some 160 nations. The 2001 terrorist attacks against the United States shook Canada out of its post-Cold War complacency. Within months, Canadian soldiers were in Afghanistan, fighting the Taliban that had sheltered Osama bin Laden and his al-Qaeda group in Latin America. Over the next 10 years, more than 150 Canadians would die in a controversial war that reinforced Canada's close ties to the United States and its commitment to the NATO military alliance. Canada sat out of the 2003 American-led invasion of Iraq, but joined combat there a decade later, dropping bombs on the so-called Islamic State jihadist group from 2014 until early 2016, when it ceased airstrikes in exchange for training and assisting local forces. Canadian foreign policy under Prime Minister Stephen Harper from 2006 to 2015 involved a sharp change in rhetoric. Harper was particularly full-throated in his support for Israel, and his foreign minister, John Baird, said Canada would not be a referee in the world, which was an implied dig at the so-called honest broker role of past Liberal governments. Canada continued fighting in Afghanistan. It pursued free trade, and its most important relationships remained with the United States and NATO member states. More recently, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has tried to recapture some of Canada's golden age luster, proclaiming a commitment to multilateralism, bridge-building engagement, and peacekeeping. His vocal embrace of pluralism and international cooperation has brought Canada new notoriety in the world. However, with no new peacekeepers yet deployed and relations with Iran, Israel, and Russia unchanged, the next chapter of Canadian foreign policy looks to be one of continuity rather than revolution.
Okay, I think that's the end of that video. Do I click to make it go forward? There we go. Yeah, so just a very quick history of Canadian foreign policy right there in the video. But one of the main points from that video was that Canada is not a big power. Canada is not a small power, but Canada is perhaps a middle power. And Canada has decided that the best way for Canada to promote its values and interests in the world is through multilateralism, that is, international cooperation. So I'll show you a couple slides. They're examples of how Canada has tried to use its influence with other countries around the world to promote international cooperation. And one of them that was mentioned in the video was this fellow, Lester Pearson, whose name is on, this is our Foreign Affairs building. This is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Ottawa, Canada. And his name is on the building. The reason his name is on the building is because he won a Nobel Peace Prize in 1956 for creating United Nations peacekeeping. So he's the father of United Nations peacekeeping. And that's to prevent conflict in the world. So another example that was given in the video is something called the Ottawa Treaty. And this was a treaty in 1997 led by Canada's foreign minister, where he managed to get 160 countries in the world to agree. This one quickly is Canada with a number of partners working how can we all combat together disinformation, mostly in social media, disinformation by foreign governments, or cyber attacks by foreign governments, or different efforts that foreign governments will try to disrupt your democracy, right? So you had some experience of that during the presidential elections in Taiwan, where there was some foreign interference or disinformation to try to affect the results of the election. So Canada has a group of countries working together to fight that problem. I'll move on. So this picture here, this slide gives you a snapshot of how Canada is internationally connected. So we are connected, as Deputy Mayor Wong had said, through our people and our languages, and you can see, obviously, English, oops, where's my pointer? If you look at the orange bubbles, English and French are the largest languages spoken in Canada, but you'll notice that Mandarin and Cantonese, or Guangdonghua and Guoyu, are often spoken in Canada as well. There's some 1.8 million people in Canada who speak some form of the Chinese language. Sometimes it's Mandarin, sometimes it's Guangdonghua and other things. But we're connected through our people to the world. We're also connected through industry and manufacturing. So you see some of the specialties that Canada has in different areas, whether it's digital technology or advanced manufacturing, artificial intelligence. So those things require international cooperation to work together. And of course, the other area where Canada is connected is through our free trade agreements. So Canada has free trade agreements with about 2/3 of the global economy. That means we have Canadian companies then get preferential access to 2/3 of the global economies through the free trade agreements that we negotiate. So let's talk about trade, how important trade is to Canada. Well, we're globally connected through our citizens, but we're also highly dependent on foreign markets. You can see which market we're the most dependent on is the United States. The little dots, every little blue dot represents $1 billion. So with the United States, we have about $2 billion of trade every day across the border, back and forth. But Canada is trying to diversify its trade as well to other parts of the world. So this just shows you how important trade is for Canada. And here you'll see, because international trade is so important, Canada has signed a number of free trade agreements with many, many countries and regions of the world. Maybe I'll just point out quickly some more recent ones. My pointer's not working too well, but you can see in 2017, Canada concluded something called the CETA, is a free trade agreement between Canada and the European Union. In 2018, we did the CPTPP, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Taiwan has applied to become a member of the CPTPP. Canada is currently the chair of that CPTPP. And you notice we had to do another free trade agreement with the United Kingdom after they left the European Union. Then Canada did another free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. So they would be covered. And most recently, just in December of 2023, Canada and Taiwan concluded a foreign investment promotion and protection agreement. So this is an arrangement to bring Canada's and Taiwan's economies closer together through investment. Canadian investment in Taiwan, Taiwanese investment in Canada. And just to make the point one more time, why trade is so important for Canada? Well, it accounts for more than 60% of our economy is based on exports, trade. 1 in 6 Canadian jobs depends on exporting Canadian products to the world. And even though we have a small population, we only are 0.5% of the world's population, we have a relatively large share of international trade in the world, 2.2%. So that's, this shows you how Canada's standard of living, or the quality of life in Canada, is dependent on international trade. And international trade is dependent on predictable rules. Everyone knows what the rules are. Everybody plays by the rules. Therefore, Canada has a big stake, a real interest in preserving international trade rules and a very stable international environment, because that's good for our prosperity. Taiwan is exactly the same. Taiwan exports a lot. You have a lot of manufacturing companies. You export a lot to the world. So what Taiwan and Canada both need is stable, predictable international trade rules and a stable, predictable international environment. Those are the things that we're interested in. So Canadian foreign policy, just to sum up this portion of my talk, Canadian foreign policy is based on our values and our interests. So I think you'll find what I'm going to say about Canada also applies to Taiwan. So what are our values? Well, our values are democracy, human rights, rule of law. Those are all the important things for Canada in terms of values. And our interests are the economy, the environment, and peace. The economy, the environment, and peace are our interests. So these two things, what's important to be able to continue in a democratic society, free and democratic society, with respect for human rights and respect for the rule of law, again, requires a peaceful, stable environment. And that peaceful, stable international environment will help us with our economic prosperity and our well-being, help us address environmental questions, which are global in nature. No one country can do it alone. And of course, maintaining peace and stability in the world. So those things, the only way that Canada can work on those as a middle-sized power is through diplomatic action, international cooperation with other countries to try to maintain and preserve these things. So the next section that I'll go on to now is I'll talk about Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. So why does Canada have an Indo-Pacific strategy? This is why. First of all, at the top, you'll see I've listed up 40 countries and economies that we'll describe as the Indo-Pacific. Everything from the Indian Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And within that, you'll see that there are some real interests for Canada in this region. First and foremost, of course, is that by 2030, 2/3 of middle-class consumers will be living in your region. In the Indo-Pacific region, 2/3 of the middle-class consumers will be living here. So that's a big market for everyone. Half, by 2040, half of the GDP of the world, half of the economic growth of the world will be Indo-Pacific. And it is also currently the fastest growing region in the world economically. So Indo-Pacific is the fastest growing economic region. As well, on the people-to-people side, as I told you earlier, currently 50% of the new immigrants, half of the new immigrants that come to Canada come from the Indo-Pacific region. That's the equivalent to 250,000 people every year will immigrate to Canada from this region, from the Indo-Pacific region. Already, 1 in 5 Canadians has family ties to the Indo-Pacific region. That's 20% of our population is already linked to the Indo-Pacific region. And with half of our immigration coming from this region, Canada will increasingly become an Asian-like nation. The three big, I think I mentioned this earlier, but the three big sources of immigration will continue to be China, India, and the Philippines, plus a lot of other places as well. Now, those are some of the interests that Canada has, but there's also some concerns. There's some challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. If we think about climate change, half of the greenhouse gas emissions come from this region. Some of the fastest loss of biodiversity in the world is in the Indo-Pacific region. A lot of the plastic that goes into the ocean is in this region. So Canada has a lot of environmental interests in working with the Indo-Pacific region to address environmental issues, including climate change. The other kind of challenges, of course, that exist in the region is in the Indo-Pacific region, there is rising authoritarianism as well. We can think about the People's Republic of China, we can think about North Korea, we can think about Myanmar. Those countries pose a risk to democratic society, to democracy as a whole. There's a challenge, threatening democracy. Also, there are many flashpoints in the region as well. I mean, all of you are aware of the tension across the Taiwan Strait, potential for conflict, but also in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea, with the nuclear missiles in North Korea, tension between India and China. So there's a lot of potential for conflict as well in this region. So there's authoritarianism, there's risk of conflict, and as I mentioned, there's environmental issues that must be addressed as well. I'd explained to you earlier how Canada, like Taiwan, is committed to maintaining a rules-based international order and maintaining universal values, democratic values. And of course, the People's Republic of China has a different agenda to push internationally, and therefore that poses a threat to some of those values and interests that Canada and Taiwan have as well. So here's that's why we have an Indo-Pacific strategy. What are the elements of Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy? Well, essentially, our objective with an Indo-Pacific strategy is for Canada to try to make a contribution to peace and stability, to economic growth and prosperity, and to sustainable development in the Indo-Pacific region. And if we can contribute to those things in this region, that will have an impact on Canada's economic growth and prosperity, and our Canadian environment as well. So our view is that everything that happens in the Indo-Pacific region affects Canada directly. Therefore, we have a stake in promoting peace and stability, in promoting economic growth and prosperity, in promoting sustainable development. So for Taiwan now features prominently in Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. Taiwan is mentioned throughout our strategy. The Indo-Pacific strategy gives Canada the policy framework, the strategic vision for what we want to do in this region, and within that, Sylvia and I receive the direction of how Canada wants to engage and be a partner with Taiwan. And it's very comprehensive. You can see the many areas where we want to work more closely with Taiwan. But let me summarize them a little bit further. So the foundational piece is that Taiwan and Canada, we share the same democratic values. We have the same commitment to human rights, the rule of law, and we have the same commitment to upholding a rules-based international order. So that's the commonality and the foundation that we have together. And based on that, let me mention 3 big areas where Canada and Taiwan can be good partners together. The first would be in the area of economic growth, economic prosperity. So Canada wants to pursue more trade, investment, science and technology cooperation, and innovation with Taiwan. Taiwan has a lot of strengths in in advanced manufacturing and in applied research. Canada has a lot of resources that we want to partner with Taiwan, and Canada conducts a lot of fundamental research. So we think there's some good partnership both in the trade, the investment, science and innovation side of things to promote Taiwan's and Canada's economic growth and prosperity. Taiwan is diversifying its economic partners. Canada too is diversifying our economic partners. So that provides some additional opportunities. In the area of peace and stability, Canada understands that there are some risks in the region. Therefore, on the one hand, as it says on the board, the last bullet, Canada has clearly stated publicly and in Beijing and in Taipei and elsewhere that Canada opposes the use of force or coercion to unilaterally change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. To reinforce that position, Canada's military participates in the military exercises in this region with our allies and our partners, with the Japanese, with the Koreans, with the Philippines, with Australia, with New Zealand, with the United States. We participate in military activities, drills and practices. And the Canadian Navy often sails through the Taiwan Strait as well, to show that we understand that to be international water, high seas, that those waters do not belong to any particular country. We also understand that an important part of defending democracy and maintaining peace and stability is a society's resilience. And therefore, Canada and Taiwan work together on questions of foreign interference, foreign disinformation, cyber attacks from foreign countries. So we cooperate on those things, and we cooperate on how to strengthen the resilience and security of critical infrastructure, whether that's transportation infrastructure, energy infrastructure, telecommunications infrastructure, financial infrastructure. How can those be made more resilient and protected from any threats going forward? So those are areas for cooperation that will contribute to peace and stability. And the third area that I'll just quickly talk about is our connection with our people-to-people ties, the Taiwanese-Canadian ties. So we have long-standing, it goes back to 1871 with George Leslie Mackay, who arrived in Dan Shui in 1871. We've had ties between Canada and Taiwan. But more recently, of course, we've done a lot of cultural work. For example, our office in Taipei, since I've been here in Taiwan, over the last 18 months, we've been running something that we call the Festival of Canadian Arts and Culture in Taiwan. We've had 22 cultural events. Some of them are film festivals, some of them are art exhibitions in the Taiwanese museums. Some of them have been plays in the theaters, musical performances. But these kind of cultural things to allow Taiwanese people to see more about Canadian culture. What I would like to see now is more Taiwanese cultural events taking place in Canada, so that Canadians too can enjoy and learn more about Taiwanese culture. Another important aspect of our people-to-people ties are the exchanges between our elected representatives. So since I've been here, each year we receive 4 Canadian parliamentary delegations come to visit Taiwan every year to meet with your elected representatives and with other people in Taiwanese society to learn, so that Canadian parliamentarians can learn more about the realities of Taiwan and can inform Canadian stakeholders, whether they be academics or business people or scientists, how Canada and Taiwan can cooperate more closely. We also have a number of students. So we have usually about 5,000 Taiwanese students a year who study in Canada. So that's a very good link as well. Most of those students return to Taiwan later, but at least they've seen and experienced Canada, and they can help be part of the bridge between Canada and Taiwan. And then finally, let me just list, well, I have one more to list after this, but academic. There are more and more Canadian university professors and university researchers who are coming to Taiwan to learn more about Taiwan and do their research here with Taiwanese partners. So that's a very good thing as well. That's that innovation and joint research. And then finally, the last area of people-to-people engagement that is a little bit unique is our Indigenous people. So Canada has a very large Indigenous population, and Taiwan has a very important Indigenous population too. So this is an area where Taiwanese and Canadian Indigenous communities are cooperating on questions of their prosperity, their rights, and their culture. I said heritage here. Heritage could be obviously culture, but it could be languages as well. Preserving Indigenous languages or revitalizing Indigenous languages. These are things that are happening in Taiwan and Canada, and there's an opportunity for cooperation between our Indigenous people. Underneath, I've written the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Arrangement. This arrangement involves 4 economies: Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, and Canada, and it's for the promotion of Indigenous business and Indigenous economic activity. Coming up soon in Taiwan, your Council of Indigenous Peoples will be hosting the World Indigenous Tourism Summit. So we have a delegation coming from Canada of the Canadian Indigenous Tourism Associations and businesses that will come and participate in that summit, World Summit on Indigenous tourism here in Taiwan. So that's just another example of the people-to-people ties that we have together. I think I'd better stop there so we leave some time for questions. But thank you very much for your attention. And if you have some questions, be pleased to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Would you like to take the questions standing? You've been standing for quite a while. Would you like to grab a